And I want to start with Lew, the older guy.
Hey, nothing from you.
Lew's a New Yorker. He's a lifelong player. He's an actual teacher and a real teacher and student of the game. And he knows a heck of a lot more than any of us about the history of the sport here in the country. So let's start with Lew and tell us everything we need to know about bocce in America. How are we here?
So, because I'm the oldest one here that I can see, looking around here, my perspective on bocce ball came from actually what Alex mentioned very briefly, from Italy. You know, I grew up in a small manufacturing village in central New York State in the Finger Lakes area that was on the it's on the Erie Canal, and that was kind of important for the development of bocce. So actually, I go back to Italy, and that's where it came from for me. And what I got here a photograph of. I've got a photograph from Italy. I'll pass it around. You can look. But basically, this is where bocce in New York State came from. It's from these guys. And this is a picture of guys from this. Pictures from the 1940s. And can you still hear me? It's getting louder over here. This is from the 1940s, and it's some of my relatives, some of our relatives, and they were gathered to play bocce. And there are three things that stick out in this picture, one of which is that they're wearing suits. Now, as I look around here, I don't see anybody putting on a suit to go play bocce.
Where's Jason?
The reason they're wearing suits is because they came from church. These were all agricultural workers. These are blue-collar folks, and they didn't have time to play bocce like we do in leagues at night and all that kind of stuff. They went to church, and on Sunday they had their time to play bocce. So the first thing that strikes me is that they're wearing suits. The second thing that strikes me, they are holding balls. Some of them are holding bocce balls. They're not the same size. When you look at the pictures, you'll see they're not the same size. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And the third thing is they're not in a court, nothing like this. They're on the terrain. They're actually in the family vineyard is where they are. And that's where they played. Wherever Mother Nature gave them a place to play, that's where they played. So that's the thing I get from this picture. And if you want to know personal, this is my cousin Tony right here. So anyway, that's just a picture from Italy from the 1940s. And so bocce for me in New York State came from guys like this. They came to the United States. A lot of them came through Ellis Island, like my grandfather and some other relatives came through Ellis Island. Some came through Boston Harbor. And a lot of them, they came for work and they came for a better life. And a lot of them stayed in the area of the ports that they came in, and some of them meandered further away. One of the attractions I know for people from our part of Italy was the steel mills. A lot of people came because they heard they could get good jobs in the steel mills in the Midwest, in the Pittsburgh area in the Midwest. So a lot of people came up the Hudson River and started shooting out the Erie Canal, going towards these good jobs that they could get. Now, these were, like my grandfather, not well-educated people. They didn't speak a word of English. I don't think my grandfather ever spoke a word of English, certainly not when he came. And they were looking for jobs. But along the way, there were little towns that had been populated, because they were on the barge canal. There was a lot of opportunity for manufacturing. And so there were manufacturing concerns all along. So if you start up the Hudson River and the Albany, Schenectady, Troy area and Amsterdam, and as you go west, Utica and the Rome area and out towards Syracuse, Canastota, Seneca Falls, where I'm from, out towards Rochester, Lockport, Buffalo area, all these towns, a lot of these towns with manufacturing were populated by a lot of Southern Italians. And of course, they brought with them their culture and their language. And that's where I grew up, in one of those little towns. So guys like the guys in the pictures, they brought their culture and their language, and that included, of course, bocce ball. And again, in our community and a lot of other communities, they would play bocce ball on Sundays. They go to church, they leave church, they'd go play bocce ball, and then so I'll talk a little bit about where they played. The area where they played in my hometown was a very crude, rugged parking lot that served a pool hall, a restaurant, and a knitting mill, which was right next to the canal. So it was rough. I mean, there were trees, there were rocks, there were, snowbanks, and there were sticks and stones, and there were ruts from the tractors and all that. And that's where they played. And when it rained, often it would make like tracks, rivets down to the canal. So when you threw you certainly couldn't roll a ball back then. You couldn't roll a ball, so you had to loft the ball, and that's how I learned how to play, and that's how a lot of us learned how to play. You had to loft the ball, right? There was a rock here, there was a tree root here that you wanted to avoid, or you looked for a soft spot to land your ball on, or you had to go between two branches to make it land over here and bounce to. That's the kind of bocce that they played, and that's when I was a kid. That's what I was watching. I was watching like my grandfather's generation, and my father's generation too, a little bit, play that kind of bocce, and it was funny to me. Everything was in Italian for one thing. So I didn't understand it, but I understand the meanings of what they were saying. The arguments and the different conversations, let's call them, and other things that were kind of crude back then. For some reason, they never bothered bringing a measuring tape. So how would they measure a ball? Well, some guy would step it off. Some guy would take out his belt, right? I mean, that was very typical. There's two balls there. You got 5 guys taking out their belts at the same time, and they're, and they're measuring like this, and it's, oh no, you moved your thumb. No, you move. No, your belt, you can't. Your belt stretches. You can't do that. That's, yeah, right. So, and then another guy with the feet and the fingers. For some reason, they never bothered with anything, anything that was objective, and that led to a lot of animated conversations, very animated conversation. Another thing I want to mention about them, so they played every Sunday, and what they played for, other than pride, was $2 a game, except when my Uncle Chester played, because he would only play for $1. So even though he was one of the best players there, they didn't. Some guys didn't like to see him show up because they could only play for $1. So after the games, and one other thing I want to mention about that, and I'll show you this too. Hang on a second. Now, we are all used to, these are the balls they used. These are not the balls we use. This is a Paulino. These are made of these are hardwood balls. And if you look closely, you can see imperfections. They're not perfectly round. They weren't all perfectly the same size. So you had to adjust. They get cracked on the rocks, and sometimes you'd have to screw them together so the crack didn't get any bigger. And there was a lot of discussion about which balls were unfair with other balls. So, I mean, I don't know, you've probably seen these, right? Yeah? So if you want to look at those. So yeah, I've got a set of those balls at home. They're pretty cool. So anyway, some things from back then have changed. The balls have changed. Anyway, so among the group of people that have played in my community, one of them decided he was going to have a bocce court. And this was a brand new idea. I mean, this is something like, a bocce court in Seneca Falls, New York. So it was actually my cousin Andy, and he got his brothers to help him out. And they built a bocce court out of railroad ties and stone dust. And that was the first bocce court in our town. And that kind of became a thing in the neighborhood and in the families, and another family got interested, and then kind of...
What year was this?
Oh, well, when I was a kid. So this was back in the 60s,
Okay.
let's say, back in the 60s. So I'm going to say over the next 20 years, a few things happened. One of which was we learned that there's a lot of Italian bocce players in Rochester, New York, and they were good, and we wanted to learn from them, you know. So that was one thing going on. Another thing going on was that there's one of the gentlemen who played bocce owned a whole bunch of land, and he had donated land to start a sportsman's club, and they built a very modest clubhouse for the sportsmen. So they'd meet there early in the morning, they go out hunting and come back to the place and have beers and food and stuff. That's what they did, and they allowed us to build a bocce court there. So we had one bocce court, and that was a big deal. And we had started out as a family thing, and then other families got involved and said, geez, let's build another court. So we built another court. And eventually we had leagues, we had women's leagues, and we got up to 4 courts, 6 courts covered. And we heard about this place in Rome, New York that had the World Series of Bocce Ball. And we decided to check it out. The World Series of Bocce had 128 teams or something like that. And we started going there every year. And from that, we decided to have our own tournament. So somehow word got out that we had on our 6 courts, we had a tournament, and we got teams from Toronto, we got teams from Montreal, we got teams from Pennsylvania, Connecticut. Am I leaving anything out? I don't think we got any from Ohio. But one of the teams we got, I thought was interesting. It was 3 brothers from Toronto. And they were Pat Peasant's dad and his 2 uncles. And they came down and they kicked a lot of butt down there. And they were great gentlemen. We had a good time talking to them. They came down, I don't know if they came down more than once, to be honest. They won the World Series 5 times. But I'm talking about our tournament in our little town. What's that? I think they came at least twice. I think they did. So anyway, the tournament thing happened. And then one thing I want to mention, there's a gentleman who, when you talk about people who promote the sport of bocce and who put their, who just work tirelessly to promote the sport of bocce, there was a gentleman named Paul Vitaliano. I don't know if anybody has heard of him. Jeff, I don't know if you heard of, Paul Vitaliano. Paul Vitaliano, back in the late 70s and through the 80s, he poured his heart and soul into bocce ball. He was out of Utica, New York, and he formed the International Bocce Association, the IBA. So the IBA would have gone on your thing too, right? The IBA. And he did everything to support. He gave advice on court building, on running tournaments, on running leagues. And he and his wife Donna, and they had a team of about 6 people, and they would go and they would try to sell the idea of tournaments to clubs, and they would run the tournaments, and they would run their own tournaments, and they ran leagues, and they built courts, and they rented resort areas in the Catskills and had people go for bocce weekends, kind of like this, right? And they were fabulous. And unfortunately, Paul passed away way too early, and the IBA kind of died out with that. But he was a force, and I wanted to mention him. He even wrote the rule book. He wrote a rule book about bocce that is still used in a lot of places in the Northeast. So my experience, what I've just told you is very typical of people in the Northeast. I think I know that a lot of the Northeast, and I don't know about other parts of the country, but Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Ohio, and New York, that was a common experience for the guys, like the guys in the pictures, that come over, bring their language, bring their culture, and start that all. And kind of to summarize what's changed over all these years, I mentioned the places they played. You know, they played on the terrain. We don't play on terrain anymore, even though I would prefer that. We use balls that are actually manufactured and you know, and the same size and the same weight. They didn't. The way we measure now, we actually use tapes and things. You know, that's great. What we play for is a little different from the $2, right? We come here, you know, we play for the pride, we play for the competition, but it'd be nice to win. You know, it'd be nice to win a little bit of money. That'd be nice. The number of players, I mean, back then, you could, however many people showed up, that's however many people played. You got 15 people show up, 15 people play. You know, that's how they did it. The biggest, two more things, and I'll be done. The biggest change, I think, and the most important to me, is back in the day, the butch was for the men. It was for the men, and it was for the older men. And in my town, it was for the guys who could speak Italian. That's it, you know. If some other guy came in, we had one guy called the soldier. Nobody knew his name. They just go, Soldat, they call him. Soldat. He wasn't out, I don't think he's Italian. He doesn't speak Italian. I don't know, but we let him in anyway, you know. But that was it. That was exclusive. You know, women, forget about it. You don't even think about playing butch. It was a men's thing. The kids, go over there and get lost. You know, this is a men's thing. And if we have time later on, I'd like to tell you a story about how it was decided at those old time games who got to drink beers afterwards. Because it wasn't everybody. Like now, if we have a game, you know, we go to the bar, we have a beer, right? Everybody gets a drink. You know, we get you a drink. Back then, it wasn't like that. It was a little competitive. So I could share that story. And the only other thing is now it used to be, there are some butch tournaments or some butch games or competitions that are just that. It's a game of butch or a tournament of butch. And some are events. And I consider this is an event. You know, it's more than just a tournament. It's an event for a lot of the reasons that you guys put all your work into it. And I appreciate, you know, I think we all appreciate, you know, all the efforts you put in. So I'll shut up and sit down.
Thanks, sir. Okay.